From your hometown news leader, News 4 begins with breaking news.
For a little breaking news, we are also going to be restoring the names to Fort Pickett, Fort Hood, Fort Gordon, Fort Rucker, Fort Polk, Fort A.P. Hill, and Fort Robert E. Lee.
Good evening, I'm Bayla Walker. Breaking news tonight, as you just heard, President Donald Trump has announced his intent to return Fort Novosel to its previous name, Fort Rucker. Now, these remarks given just hours ago while speaking to soldiers at Fort Bragg. Now, Fort Rucker was named in honor of Colonel Edmund Rucker, a Confederate brigade commander who later became an Alabama industrial leader. In 2021, it became Fort Novosel, named in honor of Chief Warrant Officer Michael Novosel, a late Enterprise resident. Now, there's no time yet for an official order from President Trump regarding the renamings or when they would take place.